Let's learn about this guy's upbringing in the Mormon community.
Very indoctrinated in that religion.
That's right. Mormonism is not a chill religion.
Right.
It's all consuming for your reality.
Were you in Salt Lake or were you in like a smaller?
A small town.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
more intense the further
Yeah.
you get away from Salt Lake.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone in my community, there were 30,000 people in my town. I don't remember knowing a single non-Mormon. They were probably there. I just didn't know them. So everyone shared a singular understanding of existence. And you have the rules. So it's kind of like this thing where the religion says, here's the rule set. And if you play by them, you get this eternal life that's spectacular. All you have to do is play by the rules. So as a kid, it's like, that's a pretty good deal, right? I can obey rules. I can do that. You then become part of this culture and you forget you're playing the game. You just are the rules. It's very hard to identify that you're actually in the game.
So when did that begin to fracture for you?
What
So I
does it
served a
mean to be
mission,
in the game in this
in
sense?
Ecuador, which even hardened my beliefs even more. And then I came back and I was 21 years old. And even on the mission, I started for the first time really thinking about the religion, because before it was more of a cultural thing. If I was embedded in the community, it was more of a practice. And there you're deep in the doctrine. And I started asking questions like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, how do I reconcile this?
This guy is like a millionaire, might be a billionaire, who is obsessed with being young forever. He thinks that he can basically be you know how they say like, oh, with modern technology, some people are saying by 2050 people could have learned to live over 200 years. This guy thinks that he's the guy. He thinks he's going to live to be 150, 200 years old. That's his guy. That's what he thinks. That is batshit insane. Yeah, he's like 40 years old and he constantly brags about being on par with an 18-year-old.
But the challenge was like half my brain was intellectually engaged in that and half my brain was emotionally engaged with what I had done. And I was of a split brain. It was very hard for me to discern what I really thought and felt about it. The religion largely talks about how you feel about a given thing, that God communicates via this emotional language. Like you feel, the Holy Spirit in doing these things. So it's very confusing because you're trying to deduce like, what is truth? How do I discern truth? Is it a logic train? Is it an emotion train? And then you have to reconcile those two things and you have to then say, I only believe in logic. That's the only way I can derive any kind of objective view of the world. And then there's this emotional cloud that's like, but really, is there such a thing as intuition and emotion and other ways to receive truth? And so as a kid trying to parse reality, especially when you've been in that your entire life, it's very hard to understand what is really going on.
So when did that begin to open up for you? Like, was there a specific event or set of circumstances where you began to feel like you needed to put some space between you and this doctrine?
Yeah, I read a biography of Joseph Smith, the founding prophet of Mormonism, Rough Stone Rolling. And I think it was written by a member of the church. So a historian, I think at Columbia, if I'm not mistaken. And it was a historically accurate account of Joseph Smith. And it was the first time I learned the true history of the Mormon church. Because when you grow up into it,
Interestingly, I was expecting this to be weirder, but honestly, this is a pretty decent explanation of how people fall away from these, fundamentalist religious movements.
you get this washed up version of this clean cut set of events where like you have good guys and bad guys. And you read the history and it's complicated and it's not clear cut. And so I read that and I thought, this is really weird because I've trusted these people my whole life to tell me the truth at any cost. Like I trust you to act in my best interest. And I read this, I thought, wait a second, this is not a relationship of integrity. I would have expected you to tell me exactly what happened so I could
Thought
parse
this
this
was
myself,
Hot Ones.
not.
It does look like he is suffering on a particularly bad episode of Hot Ones. Oh my god, dude.
Clean up the whole thing and give me some version. My trust started decaying in the institution. Like I can't trust you to tell me things anymore because you have an agenda to tell me things a certain way. And it just started falling apart from there.
Oddly enough, Bingo Bongus, he's not a Mormon anymore. Like, of the things to dunk on him for, he did successfully manage to get away from the Mormon church.
Yeah, that must have been confusing.
It's excruciating.
There's one thing that's abundantly clear with the Mormon church and these Mormon communities, which is that if you are to break ranks or part ways with the faith, you're risking your connection with that community.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot at stake. There's a gigantic.
One of the funniest things I remember my summer working in Utah was that it was considered against the Book of Wisdom to consume coffee and tea. So people would just religiously drink Coke multiple times a day for their caffeine fix. That's wild.
Social cost that comes with deciding that you no longer want to participate.
You know, this has been really relevant in recent years. So I had 3.
This looks like Charlie Rose. I mean, it's Rich Roll, everybody. So it's the Rich Roll
Historians
podcast.
officially declare Trump the worst president ever.
I did see that. There is some pretty delicious cope of Trump's sycophants like trying to no, he's not actually the worst president ever. It's very funny.
Children with a woman that was Mormon, still is Mormon. We separated, and at the time, my oldest son was, I think, 10.
Is that Talmadge?
Jefferson.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, all very young. And in that moment, it kind of replayed my childhood where my father left the church very early on. I was 3 and he was on his way out. But growing up, he was always painted by the community as a bad guy, a guy who couldn't be trusted. He was on the outside of the community. The devil must surely be whispering in his ear. He must surely be my greatest threat of pulling me outside. And so he was always held at arm's length. Now, my father didn't help himself by some of the things he did where like he could have put himself in a better spot. Still, he was other and he was outside the trust circle. And so when that happened, the same thing happened to my children where I became other. There I was, like having devoted 10 years of my life to try to be the very best dad I could. I was super attentive. I mean, I was really devoted to be a good father. The event happens, and now my kids are wondering, is dad okay? Is dad a good guy or a bad guy? And it caused this rift by, probably like 6 or 7 years.
Keep in mind, he does take his son's blood and injects it into his body like every day. So he might not be winning like Father of the Year awards, okay?
Where the kids were like, I don't know, and they didn't trust me. When they were with me, it was all this, there was this tension.
Wait, what? Yep.
We got along really well. My kids and I, we've never...
To really emphasize this guy lives like a total freak. He plans out every day with the mindset of he wants to be younger at the end of it, which means everything he does, like he gets up at like 2:00 in the morning and like goes to bed at like 4:00 in the afternoon. Like he's very strange. He is obsessed with young blood. He like every aspect of his life is controlled to try and maximize how long he will live.
Never actually got into a fight. We get it along really, really well. But there was just this tension where they could never cross to fully engage with me again, that they could trust me. Now, Talmadge, my middle child, when he was 16 years old, he left his mother's house and came to live with me to say like, hey, I'm with you, Dad, let's go. So he made the transition. But with the other 2 kids, like it's still kind of this mixed thing where I almost lost them as children, where it's like I can't be their father in a way where I could before.
Yeah, that has to be additionally painful. You, despite your best efforts to be such a good dad, repeating a pattern that your dad did, and whatever pain that must have caused you as a young child, confusion about your relationship with your dad. And your dad struggled, right? Like he
did, yeah.
had substance issues and all kinds of things, right?
He did.
Which makes for a bit of a confusing childhood. You know, and I'm trying to tie a relationship between the experience you had as a young person in the church with your father, being painted in a certain way and then out of the house and having his struggles, to the mission that you're on now. And I have to believe on some level there was some trauma that
Mhm.
you suffered as a result of this. And typically, when there's chaos like that, there's an impulse in the traumatized person to want to exert control over their life, right? Because they're used to being things being out of control. So it would make sense that you're living a life that is so, I mean, to say your life is regimented is to completely underestimate the manner in which you pursue each day. But is it fair to say that there must be some connection between those two things? Like, I'm trying to
Yeah.
understand part of the motivation for how and why you live the way that you
Yeah.
do.
So my perception of myself, which I give very little weight to, like you can observe me probably much more clearly than I can observe myself.
Mm.
So having said that, my perception is that my upbringing taught me to not trust anything. The authorities that I trusted with my soul failed me. My community failed me. Now, their responsibility was not to help me acquire awareness of all possible realities, of different religions, of different ways of being, of a history. That
Mhm.
was not their objective. Their objective was to keep me in the fold with this singular understanding. That said, it led me to distrust all authority. And then the second beat, which I think was relevant, is when I was 24 years old, I became chronically depressed. I got married. We had a new baby. I was building a startup full time. I wasn't getting much sleep.
Speaking of, he has like a weird relationship with women that probably isn't going to be delved into here, but like apparently like the last woman he was in a relationship with, like he like tried to force her to sign like non-disclosure agreements when she left. Like it's very weird stuff. But I wanted to skip ahead to his idea of philosophy here. See here.
To relinquish the power of my mind. It's an awful idea. And the next
Mm.
character is like, just hold tight, just like listen to this idea just for a minute and breathe through it. And it just swings back and forth to try to capture the various perspectives of how people think about these ideas. Most people presume that large scale societal change happens over some longer time horizon. I think it's really possible that this could happen faster than any of us imagined. And so I want to start laying the groundwork to say we can do this because as a species, we're kind of beat down. Do we really trust our institutions? Like we're at war with each other. Like social media is kind of awful. Like people are really ugly to each other. We say a lot of mean things. It's really hard to be healthy. I don't feel great. Like it's just really hard right now in society. And like in the same way we imagine
Keep in mind, this guy is wealthier than you could ever imagine. Like, he's literally one of the wealthiest people on the planet. By the way, I hate everything about this podcast. I've learned more about these assholes on the right. He's a weirdo too. I do not like all of you who voted for this. Also, this podcast is long. Look, we're not going over the entire thing, Paladin. We just skipped ahead. We just skipped most of the podcast. I just wanted to hear about his Mormon upbringing, and now we're going to learn about his idea of Zero-ism. I want to know what this guy's idea of philosophy is, I guess.
unadulterated ambition for our technology, can we start having that same aspiration for ourselves? Can we start feeling bullish about the future of being human versus like succumbing to AI and where it's going to be on universal basic income, but we're all useless? Like, how do we create some grand vision for ourselves and motivate ourselves to build a spectacular future? We don't know what's in store for us, but why put our tail between our legs and why just mope into the future? And it's really missing. Like, where's the gusto of being human? Where's our gusto of doing this? We love our technology. We worship our technology. We're willing to die for our technology. But where is that on the human side?
Mm.
That's where I want to focus because diet gets you so far.
Yeah, look, we have to protect the sanctity of work because how else would people derive meaning in their lives if they couldn't flip burgers at McDonald's? Yeah, where I don't know. This idea that like humans would lack meaning I do have mod powers on the site. You do, for some reason. I don't know why you... yeah, please don't ban Spitfire. My god. Why do you have mod powers on the site? Maybe we had like a bunch of like new people like come in at one point and I modded you. I don't know. Do not abuse. I thought it wouldn't work. Oh, I'm sorry.
And sleep just so far, but like we need a game to play. We need to have a want to exist, like an absolute burning desire to exist.
That definitely feels like it's lacking right
I love how he's like, yeah, I have chronic depression. Anyway, you need a burning desire to exist. And it's like, I feel like if you have chronic depression, you know that sometimes you just don't have a burning desire to exist, and yet you still do.
now. And I think it speaks to just a general malaise fueled by a growing sense of disempowerment in our lives.
Yeah.
And perhaps that speaks to the social constraints that we're unaware of that just drive us, on trajectories that feel like were never our choice to begin with, but which we've sort of been lured into. And with that, the creeping, increase in mental health issues and the like, you mentioned earlier, when you compare humanity to technology and we see all these advances in what we're able to do with tech, and then you look at humans and it's like a lot of mental health disorders, a lot of, increase in unhappiness and, people dying of all these chronic lifestyle ailments. And we're
Yeah, because people never died of chronic lifestyle ailments in the past. Nope, that never happened before.
treating symptoms. We're basically medicating people, but we're not really getting.
You're totally right, bro. It was way better under feudalism when, if you were a serf and you got like a toothache, a wandering barber could just take care of that for you, man. You didn't have to put up with all of these lifestyle ailments.
Getting at the root cause of what's causing these diseases, let alone exploring the antithesis of that, which is optimizing health.
Yeah.
Right. In large part, that's because we don't have a system set up that incentivizes that. So it requires not only outside thinking, but, really breaking the paradigm and creating a new paradigm.
Exactly
and that's a lonely path that you're on. So it's not surprising that you're like, please come run with me on the trail because I don't want to be the only person doing this. And if there's anyone else out there that's doing it, they probably feel, quite alone because, you have a lot of support and resources that most people don't have.
The framework that I like in understanding this
Paladin is learning mod commands.
Is a concept called Zeroism. And so first principle thinking is something a lot of people know about. You try to assume the fewest number of things in a given time frame. Sherlock Holmes is a first principle thinker. Dirk Gently, he's a detective by Douglas Adams. He's a zeroth principle thinker where he arrives at the crime scene and he basically is trying to find what's impossible. So he's trying to find the unknown unknowns. And so if you look throughout the history, the biggest discoveries that we've had, many of the most significant ones have been zeroth principle discoveries. For example, like the Earth is not the center of the universe, or special theory of relativity, or that.
I mean, you should be unbanned. Very knifey duck. The ban was only supposed to last 1 minute.
Germs are the cause of infection, or the vanishing point to allow 2D art and 3D perception. They're discoveries of unknown unknowns.
So first principles thinking would be knowing the knowns.
Yeah.
And Zeroism is figuring out how to know an unknown.
First principles is you've got puzzle pieces in front of you, and you're trying to figure out if there's a way to assemble this puzzle together in some cohesive, interesting way. And you're trying to avoid any assumption on top of that. Zeroism, you're trying to Question, is there another dimension here I don't see?
The application of Zeroism to the notion of healthspan is what?
First principles thinking is only so helpful in thinking about the future because we're up against this wall of fog with superintelligence. We can't see past it. We can't predict how it's going to happen. Like when artificial intelligence played the game of AlphaGo and beat the world champion Lee Sedol, it played moves in that game that stunned human genius. So human genius has been playing that game for thousands of years. You give that game to AI, and in a matter of days, it stuns human genius. It just breaks their brain. The moment you apply this superintelligence, computational intelligence, even its current form, not even future forms, it breaks humans' brains of what.
Is this guy also taking estrogen? Yeah, this is the blood guy. This is the guy who like injects his son's blood. It's so weird. It's so weird. But yeah, I think he also takes estrogen. Like he like regiments his entire day. My God.
What is actually genius? What is possible? And so our future is basically going to be a continuous stream of breaking our reality. Our realities have been broken in the past of like Earth is not the center of the universe. There's little tiny microbes cause infection. Einstein says actually Newtonian physics only talks about these dimensions. There's another dimension. Whoa!
But these breakthroughs are separated by decades and centuries, right?
And
whereas the accelerating rapidity of what is to come is staggering.
So I call this Gen Zero. And this is basically to say like, hey, everybody, we're right now in a moment, or at the last moment where like things kind of have been how they have been, but they're about to change radically. And in this new
Yeah, I have to say, like, this guy strikes me as, like, there's something deeply wrong with him to the extent that, like, he's pursuing, like, these life extension methods. When he's not, he's not an old guy, is my understanding. Like, he's in his 40s or something. Like, he's not old. But, like, he's so terrified of a potential death 80 years down the road that is he on the left? I mean, no. He's a tech bro. He's like a weirdo tech bro. He's not on the left. He's really just kind of in his own little world. Like the amount of wealth this guy has effectively alienated him from the entire planet. Like, he is unable to live like a normal life because of the immense resources available to him and like whatever specific neuroses lead to his obsession over this. You know, like it's truly weird.
new future, we can't predict what's going to happen. We no longer have that ability. And so we're living in a zeroth world. And so Gen Zero is a group of multi-ethnic, multinational people who rise up and they say, we are willing to courageously step into the future. And we're willing to divorce or open to divorce from ourselves all human norms, all human customs, all human thought. And we're willing to say we're wide open.
What is
about everything? Absolute blank slate. Now that is impossibly hard to think about.
It's not. You're describing like literally every like anarcho commune ever. Or libertarian communes that hilariously fail. Like what you're talking about, okay, can I be completely honest here? If I'm being completely honest, no holds barred, what he's saying here just sounds like a very complicated preamble that I've heard libertarians, like conservative anarcho-capitalist libertarians, talk about in the past. He sounds like a guy who's about to make the argument that the age of consent should be eliminated. Okay, like that's what he sounds like right now. He's basically going on and saying, "Yeah, we need to be brave. We need to step forward into the future and have a group of people who say we're not going to be confined by these old school social norms. We need to open ourselves up to all the possibilities." And that's why the age of consent needs to go. Like that's what he sounds like. He wants to look young enough to hit on high schoolers forever without drawing attention. Yeah. Yeah, and I got to be honest, it's not working. Like if I had to like say which of these two men is more attractive, there's a gun to my head, I have to say which one is more attractive. It's not this guy. It's not this guy.
Because we have the things we care about, we have our preferences, we have our beliefs, we have our wants. And to basically say we're open to this being a blank slate of existence is the most challenging thing one could ever do. I think this is why, on some degrees, I get so much flack. Like, I think people kind of see this where I'm proposing something that is so fundamentally offensive at every single layer of what it means.
This is something that like weirds me out about this type of tech bro, by the way. It's the way that they fall into the same like weird new age spiritualism that's like loosey-goosey, focused on crystals, and then they start hanging out with like the crystal moms, and then they start believing anti-vax stuff, and then they start kind of falling into like this conspiracy black hole. Like what he's talking about here is like new age spiritual nonsense. It's like the stories you would hear coming out of Silicon Valley like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 8 years ago, whatever, of like hippy dippy bards being hired for tech CEO private parties, and like these like musicians would like show up at like these tech compounds and just like play like weird little like mushroom high type music and get everyone blasted on shrooms, and they'd make like $100,000 for showing up to one of those parties, And meanwhile, everyone else that went to these parties now has all of these hippy dippy ideas going around their heads. And when I say hippy dippy, I hope you mean, that I'm not like against like hippies as a concept, just that within the tech bro world, a lot of these guys get their philosophy from like the guy down at the crystal store, like this guy is talking about how having a brave group of thinkers will totally break the entire philosophical idea of what it means to be alive in the current day and era. It's like, no, it won't. No, it won't. Yeah, it's basically Joe Rogan Philosopher Hour. Exactly. Also, hello, Alana Farrell. Hope you're doing all right. It's nonsense. But it's nonsense being sold to people with like hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And then that nonsense has knock-on effects with regards to like what they support, what gets mainstreamed by these people with tons of money and power. The most profound idea I had on shrooms was that love is the meaning of life. Not a bad message. Whew. There are groups of engineers that think all problems can be solved with engineering. Yeah. It
means to be human today. Like you take every single thing we consider to be sacred, and I'm challenging that head on, and I'm saying it. The reality may be the exact opposite.
Like the idea that one could possibly transcend every bias and every idea they have about the world and
Yes.
themselves
Yeah.
is, again, on some level, it goes back to this Buddhist idea of oneness and of no mind,
Yeah.
right? There
Yeah.
is, like, are psychedelics a part of this? Because it sounds like in order to inhabit
Yeah.
a space
I don't want to say I called it, but I called it.
of creating distance between yourself and your assumptions and your biases requires, some kind of fracture
Mhm.
process to even approximate.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think Buddhism is a really interesting example. If you look at ideologies that have emerged throughout history, you could almost look at the time and place the person emerged. So let's just take Buddhism. And if you look on the other side, what was the technology at the time and place? You could almost predict the ideological thing that would emerge. So in the time of
Oh,
Buddha,
come on,
they didn't really
dude.
have any technological abilities. The only thing you could do
What?
would be to close your eyes and meditate. You had no other abilities.
They had no other technology in Buddha's time. The only thing the kids could do, they hadn't invented hoop and stick yet. They could only play meditate. And Buddha was the best meditator, and that's the origin of Buddhism. My God, what?
And then we look at the rise of Islam and Christianity, you find this really compelling storytelling. Like, hey, there's this omnipotent being. We have these rules. If we follow these rules, we get this prize.
It's true. It wasn't until Islam and Christianity rolled around that compelling storytelling existed. What?
And that storytelling prevails for a few thousand years. But like, that was really the technology of the time. And if you say right now, what is the technological ability and what does that mean for an ideology? You could almost map the ideology. And the ideology is Zeroism. It's like it's so predictable because no existing ideology in the world has anything meaningfully to say about this moment in time. Where are the major religions in offering us practical things about this moment on how to solve our biggest problems? Even with capitalism, like, hey, capitalism, what should we do with our major problems? How do you solve this? Even that,
Yeah, capitalism. Why aren't you solving our major problems? He. Why capitalism? Why aren't you busy solving all of society's problems right now? Why capitalism? What are you doing over there? Are you creating new problems and commodifying the solutions? Capitalism.
it just is too shallow. So where do we look for inspiration and structure to do it? And this is what I've been trying to fill with Zeroism. Like, build out a philosophical structure. We can say, okay, like, we can understand where we're at. These are practical steps we can follow. We can all cooperate around these core ideas. But I'm trying to create the stableness of a foundation of how we think about and act in this highly uncertain situation we're in, and build something as much as we can predict and control in the future of a world where, it's built around this don't die and thriving.
To what extent are you actually participating in the building of that? Like, we've been talking about AI, you're an entrepreneur and you have a variety of companies.
Okay. That's about the extent that I wanted to talk about that. Frankly, if I'm being honest with you guys. Yeah, I love the idea that this guy goes and, like, tries to coin his own ideology, and his own ideology is just, what if we came up with our own ideology after throwing out all of the other conventions and, like, social taboos of society? I wonder what ideology we'd come up with then. Surely it would be better than what we have now. Citation? No, I just feel like it.